In my life, there's been three sort of themes that sort of have shaped me, I guess. The first theme, I think these are the themes that sort of shaped me, but also have been bastardised in their process. The first theme, I think, happened around 1980s and the 1990s, where we were all encouraged to work harder, not smarter, which essentially meant, ladies and gentlemen, that we had to work harder. Then the next thing that we were told to do was to do more with less, which essentially meant work harder. And nowadays we're being told almost everywhere we read and everywhere we listen to is to be resilient. And unfortunately, I think the word resilient has been bastardised by a whole range of purposes. My team is Melbourne Football Club. We were beaten by West Coast a couple of weeks ago, and their coach said, "We beat them because they were resilient." I said, "No, you beat them because you were too good," you know. And I think this word resilient is one of these words that have been thrown around regional and rural Australia, and I think we're losing the plot about what it is. In fact, if I was to ask you people the question, what do you mean by resilience, I'm sure to get a whole range of different answers. Most of them, though, would be about to suck it up and keep going, all right, to toughen up, to put a bit of concrete in your tea. We've lost this plot about what we actually mean by resilience. And what I want to do today in my presentation is actually talk about what we mean by resilience and then give you a few clues. The first thing I want to tell you about resilience, folks, it's about being whole. Quite often when you hear people talk about resilience, we're told we've got to be happy. Well, I want to tell you resilience is also about being sad. There are many communities I work with around Australia, New Zealand and overseas where I don't think it's okay to be sad. Probably one of those communities immediately jumps to mind, and I know there are some people in this room who know the people involved, has been Borey Creek and Lockhart in New South Wales, where a couple of years ago a young fellow drove on his farm, shot his wife, shot his 3 kids and shot himself. Right? And that community has been traumatised by it, and I go back to that community probably every 6 weeks. And a person there who's become a friend of mine, he's a butcher, and if I want to give you the heads up, if you want a new friend, always get a butcher. He says to me, "Dennis," over a few beers, he says, "Dennis, I'm still angry about what happened. I still can't let it go. I must not be very resilient." And I said, "No, you're not. You're being human." Because that's such a traumatic event for people, we often forget that it's okay to be sad. Another community I work with in South Australia is over at Port Lincoln, and just before Christmas, and I know there are some people in this room who probably know the people involved, just before Christmas a young fellow drove off, put his 2 kids in the car and drove off the jetty, you know. And I go to that community very regularly, and the community says to me, "Dennis, we just can't move on." I said, "Well, that's good. Because if you can move on that quickly, you're not being resilient, ladies and gentlemen, you're being delusional. And that delusional emotion will eventually come back and bite you." Resilience, though, is more than just thinking happy thoughts, you know. People often say to me, "Oh, Dennis, if you just keep busy, think happy thoughts, you'll get through it." Because one of the things that we know, especially in this sector, is that, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that happens quite regularly to your world is that, doesn't it, you know? And one of the things we need to be able to do is be able to cope with this stuff. And that's where I think resilience comes into it. So the first thing I want to tell you, folks, is resilience is about being whole. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to work in Sydney with the conference with the Dalai Lama. He's not a bad type of bloke. But for 2 days, we had to be happy, we had to be positive, we had to be optimistic. We had to be happy. Ladies and gentlemen, can I tell you how stressful it is to be happy for 2 days? After it, you feel like headbutting someone, you know? It's not real. So resilience is about being whole, folks. And to me, what resilience is the first thing I want to tell you about resilience is, folks, is we're all resilient. Some people say to me, "Oh, Dennis, you know, aren't we born resilient?" Science and research would tell us probably about 30 to 40% of our genetic makeup is transferred, right? Which leaves about 60 to 70% of our resilient and our genetic makeup being shaped by the people around us. But what resilience, folks, is, in my world, the technical term for resilience, when you read books about resilience, what they'll tell you is resilience is about bouncing back. Can I tell you something, ladies and gentlemen? You never, ever, ever want to bounce back. What resilience is about bouncing forward, you know? And it's about learning how to cope with life and thriving through the changes. And I've got to say, I changed my opinion about resilience when I first started working around 2011 with the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria. and then did some floods up in Queensland. These are still my communities. I work a lot in the drought. Up in Longreach, was obviously, hopefully we're getting a bit of green there now. Over in Christchurch and Timaru with the earthquakes over there. And one of the things I noticed most about the people who seem to be most resilient were the ones who are able to move on. It happened there, what are we going to do about it, you know? We have still got people in those communities, and I saw this up in Pinery late last year when I was working with the community and still work with that community, is that the people who are most resilient are the ones who say, look, it's happened now, what are we going to do about it? But there are people around this world, folks, Ipswich, Flowerdale in Victoria, WA up in Northern Territory, who are still cranky over in New Zealand, who are still cranky about stuff that happened. They're not being resilient, they're being resistant. Now I want to ask you a question, folks. Does anyone in this room know someone in your world who's still cranky about stuff that happened 10 years ago? They're not being resilient, they're in fact being resistant. So one of the things I want you to start thinking about in terms of your emotional well-being and psychological well-being is how well you're able to move on, to accept it's happened and to do something about it. Because I think the work I do with families and teams and communities around Australia and overseas is there's a thing I call the resilience moment. And ladies and gentlemen, for every stimulus, what is there? There's a response. Somewhere between that space of when it happens to what I'm going to decide on what I'm going to do is what I call my resilient moment, or the resilient question. And the resilience question, folks, is one I want you to get used to asking yourself as you go through life. And the resilience question is this: what's my most efficient response to this situation right now? Now, some of us have got what I call underdeveloped resilience. As I say, we're all resilient. But some of us have got underdeveloped resilience. And we'll go through what we call the flight, fight or freeze. I'm sure many people in this room would have heard that response already. The flight, fight or freeze. Flight, avoiding it. Fight, being aggressive, and freezing, not knowing what to do. Then we go into what we call a negative behavioural cycle. But folks, if I can help you be resilient, and if you can work with your families and your communities and organisations about this thing about resilience, then you'll do what I call you'll work to what I call the developed resilience stream, which is about what problem-solving behaviour is. Now, folks, here's a message for you. You know how I've talked about flight and fight? People often say to me, that's not healthy. Can I tell you, for some people it is very, very good that they actually stop and flight or deny it. And the response I often hear people say is, Dennis, I can't deal with this right now. And I saw it up in Pinery late last year when there's a really wonderful organisation, some of you know it, called Blaze Aid. Blaze Aid comes in and starts to rebuild it, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, but quite often it happens too quick. You know, one of the blokes up at Malala said to me, Dennis, I knew my stock had to be shot, but I wanted to make the decision. I didn't want someone else to come in to make the decision. And why that decision was made, ladies and gentlemen, was actually from a place of goodness. We wanted to put this guy out of his pain. So, ladies and gentlemen, can I tell you, if you can look at me in the eye and say, Dennis, I can't deal with this situation right now, but I will, that's not flight or fight. That's what I call problem solving. And problem solving is about going through the process of the resilience process, about pausing, about breathing, reframing, listening, planning and doing. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those steps later on. So, folks, there is a stage in your life that you'll go through that I call the resilient moment, or the resilient question. And that resilient question is, what's the best thing I can do right now for me and my family, my team and my community? And it's a question that I think automatically we should start to answer. Because if we can't answer it, folks, we see these types of symptoms. Now, just let you spend a bit of time looking at those symptoms and about those emotions, thoughts, behaviours and physical symptoms. The emotions of things like sadness and anxiety, thoughts of frequent self-criticism, self-blame, pessimism, behaviours of withdrawal or crying or change of physical behaviour, symptoms of chronic fatigue, oversleeping, undersleeping, overeating, undereating. All these behaviours are the stuff that we see when your resilience is starting to slip. Now let me just leave that with you for a couple of seconds for you to go through those emotions, thoughts, behaviours and physical symptoms, and I want you to ask yourself the question, have you ever been there? Right? Or do you know people who have been there? Because I cannot tell you something, in my life, the work I do, I reckon we've all been there sometime, right? But it's about why you're there, you know? And in fact, I want to tell you folks, those behaviours are very normal human behaviour. That's why this resilience is a very hard topic to talk about. In fact, can I tell you, if you haven't got those behaviours, you are in psychological terms normal. And you know what in psychology we define normal? Dead. You don't want to be dead. You don't want to be normal. So these are just normal behaviours, or usual behaviours I should say. So reflecting on that template, I want to zero it down into you folk. And it's wonderful to hear those folk talk about going around the world and all that type of stuff, the Nutfield Scholarship and all. And it's wonderful, this this agribusiness sector. But folks, we ain't going to go nowhere. I thought that slide that said the economic growth had slowed down after 2000 was a really powerful slide. And the comment was made, drought's a bit of it, but there's something else going on in terms of productivity. I wonder if it's the resilience of our topic, of our sector. Because there are three questions I want you to ask, and I want you to get used to asking yourself on an ongoing basis, and you start to ask your mates about this question. And the three questions are this: are you happy, are you well, and are you productive? In that order. Because in my life, that's not the way they're not the questions I was told to ask. I was always told, Dennis, if you get a degree, study well, marry nice, get a car, get a house, get a few kids, you'll be happy. It's a possession-based model. Wrong. What I want you to start thinking about is are you happy doing what you're doing? And that's a question I call the why. I want everyone in this room, I'm going to give you 3 seconds, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to give you 3 seconds to answer it. Why do you do what you do? And if you haven't been able to answer it right now, you're psychologically exposed. Because unless you're really clear about your why, what makes you happy, then you're exposed. I work a lot in the Northern Territory. I'll give you an example. I work a lot in the Northern Territory with the live trade export up there. And I look at this family one day, 3 hours west of bloody Catherine, so it's not close to anywhere. And I'll just look at this family, I look at the stress they're going through. And I said to this fellow, Norm, why do you do what you do, mate, with all the stress you're under, all the financial issues, all the health issues? He looked at me, he said, Dennis, because I love it. And I looked at his wife, Sarah. I said, why do you do what you do? And she said, because I love him. Now, those two people will be well for the rest of their life. You know why? Because when life turns a bit shitty, which it eventually will, they'll be able to look at their stuff in the mirror on the fridge and they know why they do what they do. We've got a young fella up in Pinery. We've got him through it now, but late last year he came to me, he said, Dennis, I've got no idea why I'm doing what I'm doing, given what's happened. Now, that bloke was exposed. We got him through it. But he lost his why. And if you lose your why, you lose your happiness. So 3 questions I want you to ask yourself, folks, is are you well, and are you happy, and are you productive, in that order? Because you can't be productive and effective unless you've got the first 2. And I think what we need to do in terms of this resilience movement that I'm trying to initiate is we've got to change the agenda, we've got to change the dialogue. Because there is a traditional mindset that if you're unwell or unhappy, you go through what I call the pharmaceutical model, which is take an antidepressant. Then you go to psychological model, go and see a psychologist, and then you go and do some self-help. That model, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely flawed. Right? It's absolutely flawed. What we need to do, and what you folk need to do, is to change the whole resilience paradigm. And that's why this topic is so important for you. First thing I want you to start doing is starting thinking about self-help. What are the things you can do to help yourself? And I'll show you what you've got to do in a moment. Then if you need to, go and see go to the psychological route. But the very last option, but it's still an option, the very last option is the pharmaceutical solution. So ladies and gentlemen, what I need you to do is to really change the way you see this topic of resilience. Now, how do we do that? Well, I'm going to tell you. 2 things I want you to do. Listen to me for the next 10 minutes. The other thing is I want you to go and buy a book called The White Knuckled Ride. Ever heard of it, The White Knuckled Ride? It's a pity it's my book. At all good bookshops. And on my website. couple of years ago, I was out at Longreach. Everyone been to Longreach recently? And I was just about 45 minutes out at Longreach, and I was seeing this community going through absolute trauma. And sometimes in life, and I got to the stage where I thought I didn't know what to do with this community. I didn't know how to help them. And I was sitting at this donga. And sometimes when you're overwhelmed with life, the first thing you got to do is sit down and have a beer, right? Full strength one, none of that bloody mid-strength stuff. And I was having a Forex, sitting in this donga, and the bloke I was working with comes to me, he's my client actually, and he sits down and he goes, "You all right, Dennis?" I said, "No, I'm not, Peter, I'm struggling. I don't know what to say to you." He goes, "Oh, well." And over there was this beautiful pink sunset. I said, "Pete, look at that bloody pink sunset over there. Stunning pink. If you've ever seen these sunsets around Longreach, they're magnificent." And this bloke said to me, he says, "Oh, Dennis, that's Cyclone Marcia over Rockhampton. If we could just get a sniff of that rain, we'd be happy." I looked at that bloke, I thought, you poor, he can't even see the beauty in what's going around him. And then I realised what I had to do. I had to give this guy some hope. And folks, the way you make yourself resilient and how you change that dialogue from being pharmaceutical based to being self-help is you do this stuff. You have hope. Now, here's your framework for you. Hope is about 4 things. It's about your habits. It's about your optimistic thinking. It's about planning. And who would like to guess what the E is? Engage. You've got to do. I used to use the word execute. But some people said to me, "Given what you do, Dennis, you reckon execute's such a good word?" I thought, fair call, So, folks, one of the things we need you to do in terms of your self-help is you start thinking about your habits. And these habits are about your values. It's about your fuel strategies. It's about your diet. It's about your health. It's about your environment. It's about connectivity. The most important thing I want you to do in terms of your resilience, folks, is make sure you sleep well. Right? Now, there's an excellent book there's 2 excellent books I want to refer you to. This one is by a lady by the name of Carol Harrington. She's a worldwide expert, comes from the University of Sydney, New South Wales. And she says that we all need good sleep habits. First thing is we need to maintain a regular going to bed and awakening time. Right? If you're going to sleep during the day, sleep in one of those things we saw first thing this morning, those headers. But if you don't sleep during the day, but look, I don't know about that. If you are going to sleep, don't sleep more than 20 minutes. Okay, then there's science around that. Avoid alcohol. No, what she says is if you're having trouble sleeping, avoid alcohol about 5 to 6 hours before you go to bed. You don't use alcohol to get to sleep, team. Next thing is avoid caffeinated beverages afternoon, which is, again, this is her template. Who here has a cup of coffee in the afternoon? Anyone? Put up your hand. Who here has a cup of tea before you go to bed? Yeah. She says if you're having trouble sleeping, don't have that. Don't smoke before bedtime. Better still, don't smoke. This is the book. You can see down the box. I really recommend this book, Complete Guide to a Good Night's Sleep. Don't exercise within 3 hours of bedtime. Finish eating 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. Adopt a going to bed routine. Going to bed routine, folks, it needs 45 minutes for our brain to get to sleep. So the last thing we don't do before we go to bed is check your emails or get on Facebook or get on, what's that thing, Tinder? Get on any of those things, right? Speaking of Tinder, your bed is for 2 purposes, sleep and sex, that's all. But the critical one that Carol talks about in her sleeping strategies is this. Keep your bedroom cool, dark, quiet and comfortable. The best temperature to get to bed is about 18.33 degrees Celsius. The best time to get to sleep, according to Harvard Medical School, is about 10:37 approximately. The best time to get up is 5:51 approximately. Right? Make sure your bedrooms are dark and quiet. Who's got a TV in your bedroom? Put up your hand. Get rid of it. Who's got a radio clock in your bedroom? Get rid of them. You know why? Because only after the last 4 years, we've got to understand the impact of, I'm trying to find an example, only got to understand the impact of a thing called blue light. You know those little resets on our TVs? What blue light does is suppresses the release of melatonin, which is the stuff that gets us asleep. So you may actually be asleep but not having restorative sleep. So there's some clues for you. And if, by the way, the reason you can't sleep is because your partner keeps you awake. So there are 5 key questions I want you to ask. And the 5 key questions I want you to ask about your sleep is how well you've been sleeping, if you had disturbed sleep for how long, and then how do you feel about yourself, your circumstance and your future. If we can get you to address those 3 or those 5 questions, you're going to be okay. So think about your habits. H is for habits, O is for what I call optimistic thinking. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know what the problem with this sector is around Australia, I reckon? I've only seen it in Vietnam and China and New Zealand. I haven't seen too much of it over outside California. But you know what the problem with our sector is globally, I think? That's a big statement. Is that we're optimists. We're optimists, we're positive thinkers. Most people in this room are positive thinkers. You've got to be a positive thinker to be in this sector. Would that be fair? And that's okay, folks, but I need you to stop it, right? Because I don't want you to be a positive thinker. What I need you to be is to be an optimistic thinker, right? I don't want you to be down that end that says it'll never happen. I don't want you to be up and here, it'll happen, right? Because it won't. What I need you to be is around that, where we start to go into that green area, which is the optimistic thinking that says, if I do this, then this will most likely happen. One of the things that most people in this room hopefully have realised by now is you've got no control over the output. The only thing you've got control about is in the input, right? So I need you to focus on the input. But I need you to be optimistic in your thinking, not positive, and I don't want you to be negative neither. So H is for? That's your go. O is for? Optimism, and P is for planning. Now, you folk are good at this stuff. This is what your strength is, your ability to plan. All I need you to do is put a bit of planning into your own personal life, right? I want you to plan your life, you know. I want you to start with the end in mind. I want you to do the stuff you do good. Put milestones, you know, put all those things you do about planning, but put it about your own life. But one of the things I want you to do when it comes to planning is I want you to learn to say yes. And by that, what you people have become very good at in your life is to say no. I saw this up in Pinery. I saw it up at Nil in the Wimmera, where all this money was being thrown at people, and guess what you people told us? I'll go and give it to old mate down the road, they need it more than me, you know. Victorian government has got all this money that the Wimmera farmers, who are in absolute drought now than flood, but absolute drought, wouldn't accept because they refused to say yes. They would just say no because they saw it as a sign of I'm not quite sure what. So P is for planning. So you've got to have a goal. And then the last thing is you've got to enact. As Carl Jung would say, you are what you do, not what you'll say you'll do. Now, most of you people will never do anything about this stuff until you have what we call a tipping point moment. And a tipping point moment is when you say to yourself, look, enough's enough. I've got to do something different. And you get to that point in your life where you say, well, if I always do what I've always done, guess what I'm always going to get? What you always got. So I've got to do something different, right? And the best way, when you get that tipping point, do the workability question. The workability question, folks, is however you're dealing with this current situation right now, how's it working for you? Because if it is working for you, do it. And if it isn't working for you, then do something different. But if you are going to do something different, folks, 3 pieces of advice for you. How do you need an elephant? Bits at a time. 2 ways a shark dies, old age, or 3 actually, old age netting. But how does a shark essentially die? When it stops moving, right? Don't be like the shark. Don't stop moving. Look at the elephant, eat it in small parts. But then the other piece of advice I want to give you is who here has been to Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi or Vietnam? What advice do they give you when you're crossing a street? Take 1 step at a time, don't stop moving, and don't look back, all right? And I reckon there's a lot of advice to that in terms of emotional resilience. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity of speaking with you. Some people say to me, Dennis, what do you want me to do in terms of my resilience? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to develop a really resilient lifestyle. I want you to understand the why in your life. Why do you do what you do? If you don't understand that within 3 seconds, go and think about it, put it on your fridge at home. Be whole in your emotions. It's all right to be sad. Okay, it's all right to be desperate, all right to be panicky. That's okay. It's what you do about it, right? Can I just say to the young men in the room, because it is a young men thing, toughness is bullshit, okay? Fragility is strength. So if you can reach out to people and say, look, you know, I'm going a bit tough here, that's what I call resilience. When you go back in your own room and drink and do whatever you're going to do, that's not being resilient, that's just being frigging dumb, all right? Now, you know the rates of suicide, you know the rates of depression, I don't want to talk about that today, but it's about this thing we think, oh, you've got to be tough. Well, you don't. The greatest sign of strength, I think, is being open and being fragile. So be whole. Set realistic expectations. There are 3 reasons, ladies and gentlemen, why people get depression. 4. They've got the chemical reason. The other next one is we set unrealistic expectations. We compare ourselves, so don't compare. And the other one is we overthink. Overthinking is an absolute danger to your emotional well-being. So don't compare. Stay engaged with the community, with your friends, sporting club. Manage your physical environment. Make sure there's plenty of colour in your environment, not brown. One of the things we talk about in Longreach, one of the things we talk about in Walgett when they're really dry, and the other sort of Dubbo, is see if you can have green grass around your house, you know, because if the only thing you can see during the day is bloody brown, it's just, it kills you. Get comfortable with saying yes, folks. The greatest challenge, the most heroic question you'll ever ask someone is, can you help me? Be grateful. One of the ways we trick our brain is before we go to sleep, think of 3 things we're grateful for during the day. It releases all the good hormones. Work with your family and your friends. Choose who you interact with. This is a really big one for your emotional resilience. Rule number 1 in life, folks, don't hang around with dickheads, all right? Now, sometimes people come to my office and say, how do I know when I'm hanging around with a dickhead? I say, that says more about you than it says about them, mate. So really focus on who you're thinking about, but give yourself your brain a break. It needs about 4 days for you to really get your brain focusing, and remember the need for emotional intimacy. And the way we get emotional intimacy, ladies and gentlemen, is by being fragile, by putting ourselves out there and by asking for help. So thank you for the opportunity talking with you. If anyone wants any more information about that, that's me. I'm sure you can get more information through the program, and I'll pass it back to you. Okay? Thank you.